Hello everyone and welcome to the Eternal Spoiler Breakdown. My name is Myriad and today we're going to be looking at the new versatile mechanic as well as a few other spoilers that have shown up in between our last spoiler breakdown and this one. This is all for Behemoths of Thera coming out January 18th. We're going to be streaming that day, so tune in and you can see us there at Twitch TV/Myriad. But first things first, let's talk about versatile, shall we? So versatile is a pretty simple keyword by and large. It only belongs on relic weapons, and it specifically says that as a relic weapon, you can either play this on your own face, like you would a normal relic weapon, thus giving you the ability to attack enemy units for 3, or you can play it on your own units as a normal weapon. So you can then just use it to buff a unit for +3/+3, give it all of the different abilities that might happen for that type of setup. So this example here, Ancestral Edge, is a 3/3 weapon that you can either play on a unit to give it lifesteal and a bunch of extra bonus stats, or play on yourself to give your own spells lifesteal and to give you the ability to attack enemy units with lifesteal for extra benefits. This is pretty neat. I like the general idea of versatile. I think it works pretty well for a lot of different weapons. It seems like it's just like a keyword that works pretty well for like almost an evergreen type of set. You could just have versatile weapons pretty easily already, and like there's a lot of like really easy design space for it that you can definitely do some cool things with. But this is like a pretty exciting version of it. Like not only does it have that really nice boost in a draft environment for like one of your like units to like sort of get things up a little bit stronger, but I do think that like giving your own spells lifesteal is really fun. There aren't a lot of good ways to give yourself lifesteal. Relic weapons just don't really like do that too often. A lot of the ones that do tend to do it very temporarily. The 2/2 life drinker that temporarily gives you lifesteal is like one particular example. So something at 5 that gives all of your spells lifesteal is definitely like has some interesting potential if you want to do some weird shenanigans. And there's always some possibility that you can like maybe pull out some interesting infinite combos with this Throne or weird nonsense like that by combining gaining life with dealing damage in some like sort of interesting way. I'm not sure quite what the build would be for that, but it's just like one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, this is something that you definitely want to build into. However, the card is appropriately costed to discourage that a little bit. It's 5, it's got the triple green, so that means it's not going to be easy to mix with other cards that do damage, which typically come in red or purple. But all the same, this is something that effectively gets you a little bit up on life, is probably going to be a pretty high pick in any limited environment. Like if you're in draft or sealed, you're probably going to be pretty happy to see this because you can, of course, put it on your big flyers, and you can also use it as a removal spell. 2 things that I think are just like really important in any type of limited environment. So this is like a really high tier limited card, and in terms of like possibilities for Throne or Expedition, I think building around the lifesteal really does make for some interesting options. And even if you can't get your particular like combo or a weird interesting option with the lifesteal off, you can still play this card like as a pretty reasonable bump. So it seems like a pretty reasonably powered weapon that also like just the general flexibility of it does work pretty well. If it weren't for that triple green, I think you'd play it in quite a few decks. As it stands, it's just a pretty interesting option for mostly mono green decks, or at least green decks with just a little bit of splash. Well, let's talk about all the other versatile cards first, but we'll come back to some of the other spoilers that were spoiled in communities. So we have Mantis Claw here. This is a 3-cost 3/1 versatile, and it's a relic weapon. So yeah, like as you can see, versatile does come with a pretty heavy cost. Like if you were playing this as a regular weapon on one of your own units, it would cost 1 for a 2/1. For a 2 cost, like a 3/2 was generally pretty acceptable. But at 3 cost, Mantis Claw is just a 3/1. And, you know, like we have seen relic weapons that also have similar costing. Like there definitely is like some, there's like I think a 3-cost 3/3 relic weapon. There's quite a few relic weapons that are 3/4s. You know, there's just like not too many that are just going to be, this is definitely like a worse stat value than you would generally see on a weapon for either type. But the ability to flexibly play it on 2 different types of units does mean that you can do some pretty good stuff with it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a 3-cost card that kills one of your opponent's units, or you play it on your double damage stuff to like make things really, really bad for them. I think the general flexibility of these cards does increase their value significantly, and it's pretty obvious why they're costed a little bit more inefficiently than that, due to the fact that like you can just use them to gain certain advantages and play around with some other possibilities. So yeah, Mantis Claw is a pretty interesting implementation of this, and I'm sure we'll see a couple more versatile cards in the future. In fact, there were 4 in the spoiler. We've also got Murgo, the bone guy. Which, lovely name for a card, delightful design, of course. Let's talk about Murgo. He's a 2-cost double shadow 2/3. When he hits the enemy player, you hunt 1, meaning he either gains the +1/+1, or you get an extra power card, depending on what your opponent discards, which is going to be pretty exciting. However, his ultimate is pay 5 to transform a unit from any void into a versatile weapon with the same cost and strength and health, and then draw it, which is just absolutely delightful. Now, obviously, there's a lot of like really weird shenanigans that you can pull with this. If you can put like a 12/12, I don't know, Spirit of Resistance into your discard pile or something like that, then you can transform that into a very, very large weapon, and then like, you know, potentially play it for a significantly like more interesting set of values. I believe there is a 2-cost that dies very, very quickly in blue, but is something like a 6/7 in stats. I have to think of what it is, but like there's definitely some interesting options for like units that have significant restrictions on their own text that you can then maybe mill to your own Murgo the Bone Guy and then make into very, very large weapons to do other shenanigans. And if you're not doing any of that, this is still a 2/3 that hunts repeatedly every time that it hits. That seems really reasonable in a limited environment, in an expedition environment, and like the fact that it just draws a card for you on top of that just makes it like a really reasonable 2-drop for the 2-slot in deeper shadow decks. I don't think this is ever going to be something that you're going to be really complaining about running. Maybe it's a little too slow and thrown due to the double shadow influence, but odds are pretty good that you could find some sort of interesting combos for it. This is clearly a card that fits in a wide variety of interesting decks, and also just has like a lot of dumb things that you can do with it, which is very, very exciting. So yeah, we'll see exactly what all Murgo can get up to, but yeah, the Bone Guy, he's got you covered. Alright, I think our last one of our versatiles is Osuar Longbow. It's a 4-cost 3/3. When you summon, it hunts 2, meaning it can go up to a 4-cost 5/5, depending on what your opponent discards, or you can refund some of that cost. At this point, we're actually looking at a pretty efficient weapon. Like, this is either like on the different ends of the spectrum, this is a 2-cost 3/3 because it refunds 2 of the power in terms of spells that give you +1 power, and even like a little bit better than that because it actually jumps you up in power on your next turn. But, you know, like if you were just playing for like raw tempo, then 2-cost 3/3 with Overwhelm, not too bad for a relic weapon, not too bad for a regular weapon. On the other hand, it can also be a 4-cost 5/5, and if you get something like that with Overwhelm, then you're looking into like effectively Obliterate territory, a little bit cheaper, a little bit more damaging, still has Overwhelm. This card seems really, really good. Like, the main things that are really exciting about it are that just as a relic weapon, it's pretty solid removal that tends to like blow up a lot of different things. The one thing that you have to be really, really careful with this card is if you are playing it as a 4-cost 3/3, you do have to be sure that you're actually able to kill anything on the board with it as a relic weapon. So if you're playing this as a relic weapon, you're gambling a little bit on whether or not the card gets bigger in order to deal with larger threats. So, I mean, maybe it efficiently deals with a normal like 3 health unit, and maybe you get even like a little bit of extra on top of that. But if you're trying to take out like a larger unit efficiently, Osuar Longbow is not going to reliably produce that extra value and get up to that 5/5 every time. Sometimes you're just going to get a 3/3 relic weapon, which is not so great. But in those circumstances, when you're not really certain it can be used as effective removal, you can still use it to beef up one of your own units, and that's always like pretty solid. I would say that the additional stats on this can be really, really good. On top of that, this is effectively like looking at 3 to 5 additional stats. A +3/+3 is very good combined with Overwhelm on a wide variety of units with good battle skills, but if you get it to like a 4-cost 5/5, that is still really, really, really ridiculous. I think that weapons and relic weapons tend to have like very similar cost ratios where it's pretty reasonable to expect like either your relic weapon or your weapon to have about the same type of stats. So like you're not really losing much by playing it on your units versus playing it on yourself, except that one is like very focused on like the card advantage control game, and one is very focused on the kill your opponent game and risks your card advantage on removal and such a stuff like that. Still, Ossuar Longbow seems very ridiculous, just like the addition of Overwhelm to that giant pile of stats makes it a really interesting unit option, and the high roll on the removal aspect of it effectively makes it into like that kind of cheap obliterate effect that you're not actually ever going to see normally. Like 5-cost deal 6 Overwhelm is a spell that has always been like pretty solid, like for just sort of getting through, but just a little too expensive, and a 4-cost deal 5 is potentially significantly stronger. So the real question is, like, can you use as a removal most of the time? And if not, are you happy with it on units? So I think that, like, as long as you are playing with the versatile aspects of this one looks like one of the stronger relic weapons with versatile that we've seen so far. Okay, so those are all the versatile ones. Let's look at these other ones because we skipped past a bunch of them. So we've got Insatiable Anteater. This is one of the community spoilers from December. Insatiable Anteater is a 5-cost double time. When the enemy player draws their second card in a turn, you draw a card as well. And it also has Summon Nightfall, which means that this card is going to trigger literally the turn after you play it. I think you might even be able to trigger it before your opponent can have any sort of response. Like, so it's something like you play the Anteater, Nightfall is triggered. I believe you can end your turn without there being a pause. And then your opponent will draw 2 cards, which should trigger the Anteater's ability, meaning this card can replace itself the turn that it's played if you were playing it last, which that's pretty strong. Like, that is something that definitely gives you like a really reasonable amount of like extra oomph in terms of overall value. And since it has Summon Nightfall, it basically just plays around with a lot of different Nightfall-based strategies, which we can definitely expect in Behemoths of Thera. So this is an interesting one. I think that it is not like particularly well statted for the other things that it's doing, but against other Nightfall decks, it really kind of generates like a pretty good setup. It's got that 4 defense, which is enough to kind of stymie some of the like more aggressive Nightfall stuff. It's just kind of like in the middle there as far as like stats go, but I would say that the combination of the extra card draw and the fact that it has Nightfall and therefore can be played in other Nightfall decks means that this one might see a little bit of play in Expedition, but probably not Enthroned, just because the stat line is so weak on it. All right, Mantis Claw. We already did. Midnight Reprieve, depleted, gain an influence of your choice, Nightfall. So really, really simple. This one effectively just says, play a depleted power, get whatever influence you want, also trigger Nightfall if you're into that. I mean, you have to Nightfall, so that does mean that Nightfall is traditionally something of a disadvantage in slower decks, because what you are doing is you're giving your opponent a card draw before you give yourself a card draw. But if you are playing a Nightfall deck, then your deck is generally going to be a little bit faster than your opponent's stuff. So this enables you to sort of play around with like 5-color Nightfall or 4-color Nightfall and like fiddle around with like really, really deep influence decks that have like a lot of more difficult requirements and still potentially get into like high Nightfall aggression, draw a lot of cards. I'm not sure where this one's going to fit, but it seems like it definitely is a piece of a puzzle in certain power bases, and in certain high Nightfall decks this might be really, really strong. On the other hand, some of the Nightfall decks are going to be Shadow and Fire, and they're probably not going to want Midnight Reprieve because depleted power is not amazing, even if it comes with that extra 1 point of damage to the face that Midnight Reprieve applies. But if you want to deal your opponent some direct damage while playing your power, and you don't mind depleting your power in order to do so, this potentially is the card for you. I think overall this definitely seems like it should see some play in all different types of formats, but the question of what it is going to be best in is a little bit iffy. I would say most likely it's going to be an Expedition card most of all, because that's the place where Nightfall decks will be probably the most popular. All right, Olos Elder Ranger, 2/3. The first time you play another unit each turn, it hunts 1. Spellcraft 4. play with some of the elders. So 3 cost 2/3 is not amazing, but this does give you hunt 1 to every other unit that you're playing, which also triggers, any other stuff that really cares about hunt. If you're playing like a hunt-based deck, then Olos is obviously going to be in it. It's also a hero, which is minor bonus to subtype, sometimes matters in certain formats. And then the spellcraft ability, Wisdom of the Elders, I mean, you're probably pretty happy to play this on 7 if you are basically like not really sure what else you have to play. Like if you draw this and it's like, oh, I drew an Olos Elder Ranger late in the game, this is definitely something where it's like, you're feeling pretty good about it, because not only do you get a unit on the board, you also get to draw 2 cards, which even paying 7 for that can be worth it if this is the card that you're drawing off of your top deck. You're not going to feel too bad about that. So yeah, seems like a strong limited card, should be pretty good in Expedition. Throne-wise, it's a little bit slow. The Hunt ability is, like, I'm guessing Hunt is not going to be insanely powerful in Throne, but we'll see. And then, basically it'll just belong in decks that really care about Hunt, I think. All right, and then the final one I think that we have to review today is Youngblood Recruit. So let me double check. Yep, so that's a 4/2 Overwhelm with Spellcraft 1, play Ruin. This card's really good for a lot of different reasons. One, it's a decently aggressively statted unit, like double red for a 4/2 Overwhelm. That's not terrible. I think that's generally going to be pretty aggressive. Allows you to go pretty hard on like normal red aggression while having the option to destroy your opponent's attachments, because Ruin, of course, kills your opponent's relics, relic weapons, curses, really any type of attachment that they play, you can just break it. So this is effectively a Furnace Mage, except that it has Overwhelm, which is a really good deal. It's got 1 less point of health, which is, a little bit iffy, but not the end of the world, because like a 4/3 for 4 was always like a little bit sketchy. This one is a 4/2 for 3, but technically 4 because you're playing Ruin with it. So it's like a little bit less sketchy, I think. As a like blank 4/2, you're not going to be feeling too good about it. But I mean, the Overwhelm really does like sort of make up a lot of the difference here, because it allows you to attack aggressively with this card and do some pretty interesting stuff. And then I think the Overwhelm is just like the main thing that is a selling point over Furnace Mage, and that actually might be a strong reason to prefer this card over Furnace Mage in Throne, in Expedition, in just anywhere that you might want to play it. Like, I think this is going to be a pretty good uncommon to be playing around with and destroying your opponent's attachments with. It's definitely going to be very helpful against Creation Project decks, which I know are still somewhat popular at 4. Yeah, there's going to be a decent amount of like interesting options to sort of play around with it. Furnace Mage has always been a pretty good effect that people should generally be playing. The Overwhelm here means that you get to do some like really interesting things with it, and then also allows you to play around a little bit more with, of course, versatile relic weapons and other types of weapon-based effects, any types of like unit buffs. You just get a lot more value out of synergizing with this card than you would with Furnace Mage, which is traditionally just kind of an awkward vanilla unit that exists in your deck to mess with your opponent's plan. Whereas Youngblood Recruit might be a little bit awkward, but it is something that if it's in your deck, you might have some ways to play around with it. You might be able to give it that extra bonus through weapons, through your finest hours, through really anything that you're feeling like doing. So yeah, very, very cool stuff. Oh, there is one more card, and I don't see it here, so let me go check for it. Here we are. I knew I couldn't forget this one because it's a really exciting card. So this is 3 cost Rakano 1/1 Warcry. Steelborn Responder summons, draw a weapon of your choice from the top 7 cards of your deck, give it +1/+1, bottom the rest. So right away, there's a lot to love about this card. First off, it gets you a weapon while also giving it a +1/+1 bonus, which generally improving the strength of your relic weapons or your versatile weapons or even just your weapons is really, really good when you are selecting for them. Cards like Rise to the Challenge have always been like very, very solid choices, tend to be a little bit slow, but definitely are usually worth it to do because the ability to select a weapon and also make it so that it's just a little bit better really matters for the purposes of making sure that that card can effectively remove something or effectively get you over the top on a like obliterate or damage dealing spell. Weapons are just better the more stats that they have, and relic weapons in particular get like a higher threshold of removal and a higher threshold of durability based off of like extra bonuses, which can be really, really important. Steelborn Responder is doing quite a bit of extra duty in armory decks and other types of decks that care about weapons specifically, and I think this does represent a return to potential armory metas, because it is a unit that you can play that gets to stay on the board and warcry repeatedly, which means it does demand some form of attention. You have to block it at least. You have to potentially kill it before it attacks. So it's reasonably likely to even get you like that +2/+2 if your opponent is not doing anything to address the card value of it. It replaces itself with weapons, so as a 1/1 unit, that's reasonable. It's cantripping, but it's cantripping in a way that actually tutors for a really effective option. And then on top of that, you get to boost up even more of your weapon-based strategies by using the Warcry, which means that the card just needs to be in some way responded to. But yeah, the main thing about this that's really, really good is the card selection. The fact that you can pick up any of those relic weapons, do some really wild things with them, kind of makes a big difference. So think of this in terms of say the 5-cost triple green versatile weapon that we just saw that's a 3/3. If you Steelborn Responder this, that becomes a 4/4 right away, which means that you can immediately get a 4/4 relic weapon that has lifesteal, use that to start beating up on things, do some really interesting stuff on 5. But if you don't want to use it as a relic weapon, you can also just attach it to the Steelborn Responder, which is a body for any weapon that you draw. So that's a pretty good body because the card gets Warcry, so you're already giving it something that it's already got some bonuses to attacking and is already a card that kind of wants to be improved upon. So that's really solid. I think that the fact that the card demands a response while also effectively getting you a tutor effect and replacing itself as a card really puts this high on the value engine and allows you to play around with relic weapons in a way that you might not previously have done. This seems like a really strong choice for Throne decks. I think it's pretty solid in Expedition and Limited and probably makes for the entire versatile meta being a little bit more Rakano focused. There's some very, very good stuff happening here. I think this card is really, really strong. So there's a lot of really cool things going on with it, and it just seems like a really interesting choice for making sure that you can do just any number of different important toolkit options in your relic weapon deck. Yeah, I don't know. I think this is definitely up there. So yeah, that's our last spoiler for today. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back January 18th, of course, but we'll also be back with more spoilers as they come out. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I am Amiriat, and I will see you all next time. Cheers!